Have some folks in the room. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, so thanks so much for joining us. I think we're just going to give it 2 more minutes and we'll get started.
Okay.
Maybe 1 more minute. Folks are coming in quick. Great. Oh, so great to see you. Nice and neat. Okay, yeah, we have a good room full of folks here, so let's get started. Thank you all for coming, first of all. It's been quite a shift for all of us. You know, COVID-19 has really altered all of our lives significantly, and for us as an organization, it's changed how we operate as well. So this is the first of our first artist talk in our digital programming series, which seeks to sort of move our programming online. So for those of you who might not be that familiar with Nia Centre for the Arts, our mission is to support and showcase art from the African diaspora, particularly African Canadian artwork. And so we create spaces, whether they be digital or in person, for Black artists to showcase their work to audiences. So tonight we are going to be doing an artist talk with a dear friend of Nia Centre, Gordon Shadrach. Thank you for joining us, Gordon.
Hi, nice to be here.
And before we get started, I'm just going to do a land acknowledgement. Typically when I do this, it's a moment for me to reflect on my relationship to the land, how I'm feeling in that moment. And usually I'm standing up, on the ground on my feet. And so I feel much more grounded. And so it's a bit unique to do it today in a way that's digital. But I think for me, what's coming up is our connection to the land being so important. Particularly during this time, I think about how COVID has altered our relationship to our physical environment, and how I've been reading reports about the ways in which the environment, animals, the ecosystems that we use every day to feed ourselves are thriving in the absence of human activity. So today I'm grateful and want to use this moment to reflect on how our environment continues to nourish us during these times. I also want to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of this land, the Huron-Wendat Nation, the Métis Nation of Ontario, the Mississaugas of the Credit of First Nation, and the Six Nations of the Grand River. We stand on the bones of Indigenous people on this land. We acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those who came to Canada in this generation or in generations past, particularly those who came involuntarily as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. So we honor all of our ancestors who are here today. So with that, I'd like to welcome everyone to our first webinar, Creating Space to Speak with Gordon Shadrach. I'm gonna do a bit of housekeeping. I see a couple people already active in the chat, which is great. Thanks for joining us, Leslie. So if you aren't that familiar with Zoom, I'll point out just a few features to you that you can find at the bottom of your page. So there is the chat function, which you can use to have a conversation about any of the things that we're talking about, or if you're feeling like you have a question or just want to share any information or any reactions, you can do that there. To the left of that, you'll also see the Q&A function. And that's your opportunity to tell me directly if you have a question for Gordon, and I can share any questions that come up with him through that. And then there's also actually no, we don't have a raise your hand feature. I thought we would, but okay.
So we should have a raise your hand feature for the folks who are participants. So I don't think we can see that feature, but folks, you should be able to do that, and you can test it out now. You can raise your hand, but that's just the way that you can ask questions, and then one of us will call on you and you'll have a chance to verbally ask your question to Alika or Gordon.
So that's Adele. She's our program manager, and she is much more well-versed in Zoom than I am. So I'm still getting familiar. So feel free to test out these different features. I think one thing that we were talking about, myself and Gordon, is just we're so used to having a live audience. So it's always interesting to start having a digital conversation where the response of the audience is sort of coming through in different ways. So don't feel like you have to wait to the very end for questions. We'll definitely take them throughout the conversation today. So with that all covered, I will start off with a bit of an intro, introducing our special guest. Gordon is coming to us from the East End in his home. He's lived in Toronto for over 25 years, born in Brampton. He received his Bachelor's of Design from OCAD University and went on to complete a Master's of Education from Niagara University. He started painting more recently in 2013, and typically uses oil and acrylic on wood. Gordon's work can be found in, he's done both solo shows as well as group shows in both Canada and the US. And more recently, he was part of the Royal Ontario Museum's exhibit, Here We Are, Black Canadian Contemporary Art, which one ended up his piece in conversation subsequently went on tour both in Montreal as well as Nova Scotia, the art gallery there. So I think many of the folks here on this call have become familiar with Gordon's incredible portraits, which typically you create from photographs. And so tonight I'm really excited to welcome you.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. It's very exciting to be doing this in this format. I don't know where to...
Pushing us all.
All right, I'm looking at your corner while I'm talking. How's that?
We're in conversation.
Yeah.
So tonight we're going to go through, some of your early works, your inspiration, your technique, as well as dig a bit more deeper into your most recent show at United Contemporary Gallery. And I'll be sharing some images as well of Gordon's work a bit later. But let's start off with, I always find it really interesting to ask artists how they started, because I feel like the path to becoming an artist is never a straight or like linear line. So how did you get started?
Well, you're absolutely right. It wasn't linear at all. I was always an artistic kid. So when I was little, I was always drawing. I drew a lot of superheroes. I actually learned how to draw comic books. And I was encouraged by my parents. Both my parents were immigrants from Trinidad, and they were both teachers. And they encouraged me to study art. And I said no. And then they realized I could sew. So they said, why don't you study fashion? And I said no. So I had very unusual parents that really saw the value in those things at a time when I think a lot of parents don't. And I think a lot of parents still have trouble with encouraging their kids to study art. But essentially, I didn't feel comfortable studying art originally because I didn't think it was something that I could be doing. Even though I was intuitively artistic, I love to draw, I just never studied it in that capacity. But eventually I did take some art courses, and I ended up going to OCAD, and I studied textile design. And of course you take the color class and a few painting, life drawing classes. But I didn't actually start painting until 2013 because I was sort of encouraged by my partner, who, when I wanted to buy a print of a bow tie, he said, don't buy it, you should try painting it. So, and I did. And this is why I think social media is great. And then I published my painting on Facebook, and people loved it. And they were blowing a lot of smoke my way. So I was like, sure. And then I did a couple more bow ties, and that was in 2015, and I haven't stopped painting since. So, it was really not something I saw myself doing at all. Did not imagine I would be doing this.
And so did you feel like, I guess, a bit of a transition or a challenge in sharing your work initially? I know, was it that you were just sort of sharing it to, see what people thought? You kind of thought, okay, I'll just put this out there, or were you sort of hesitant about it?
I was just kind of happy. I was like, hey, I did a painting, I'll just share it. So I didn't really think about it. And then people being so positive about it really it did, fuel the fire for me to continue to try doing a little bit more. And that was surprising because I know I used to be sort of hesitant to show my work. They're your babies. You sort of keep them close when you doodle, and you don't want people looking at your sketches. But this, I think I was settled. I'm, a mature person at this point. It wasn't really, I was just doing it for fun. It was just a nice hobby at that point.
And so when did you decide, okay, this is a hobby, it's fun, it's bringing me joy, but when did it sort of take a turn to become a bit more serious?
Well, it's funny because I was just talking to a friend about the point in life when you decide you can call yourself an artist.
Right.
And so when I did my first little show at a friend's cafe, I was hanging my paintings, and they said, are you the artist? And I said, no, I'm the guy who painted the pictures, but I'm not the artist. So I think it was a really slow process for me to see myself as an artist.
Mm.
But I think, one of the moments I've talked about a lot, and I think you actually put the quote up on your Instagram page, it's when I started to really feel like I was doing something that had value, was even actually before I talk about what I was just going to say, is when people started seeing things in my paintings that I wasn't necessarily aware of. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, oh, I mispainted, I didn't paint something correctly. I mean, people started having emotional responses to them. And when I first started painting, it was about developing technical proficiency. It was about becoming a stronger painter. It was about challenging myself to see what I could do next. It was about learning how the paint worked and how I could achieve certain values. And so when I started talking to people at art fairs and they started saying, oh, this reminds me of this experience in my life, that was when I was thinking, okay, this is really interesting. And I also started asking people what it was that they liked about my work. And so that's giving me information about how my work was being interpreted. But finally, the push was, as I said, the quote that you posted was about a Black man walking right to my booth at an art fair, the Toronto Artist Project, a few years ago, and saying, I see myself in that painting. And he was just so in awe of seeing a Black man being represented in a portrait. And even my journey to get to portraiture was very odd. I didn't start off with faces. I started painting shoes and clothing. And then when I started doing portraiture, the only reason why I did it was because I said I couldn't paint faces. So I said, everything I paint, I always say, I started off by saying, I can't do this, so I'm going to challenge myself. And so when I started to see that, and then I met some other gentlemen who have become collectors who saw value in my work and appreciated the fact that they were seeing Black people portrayed in portraiture. And at that point, it was mostly just self-portraits. That made me really
yourself.
Yeah, it was the person who responded to was a painting of me actually, and it was knowing that people were seeing something of value and understanding that this is exactly how I felt in my life, that I have not really seen things that I feel I can connect to,
Right.
or feel that I'm a part of. And so realizing that people could see that and get that from my work, whether it was the stuff before I did in my portraiture, or recognizing that it was meaning a lot more to a lot of Black people and people of color who weren't being represented. That was a big turning point for me.
I can imagine that the significance of those moments for them as well. I mean, for me, I went to galleries a bit when I was younger, and I think you're always struck by just, in a Canadian gallery, how much landscapes there are, and these fancy portraits of people that you don't know and you can't connect to.
Right.
So that ability to see someone who reflects who you think you might be, or someone in your family can be a really transformational experience.
Yeah, it was definitely encouraging too, and it gave me the confidence to go in the direction of becoming more representational in my work.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So folks, we're going to shift into showing you some of Gordon's work. So if you are new to Zoom, just be aware that you can use the split screen feature so that you can see both us as well as the artwork at the same time, or you can choose to just look at it full screen. So there's a couple of buttons on the far right corner, and those should help you choose how many individuals or participants you see at the same time. Is there anything I'm missing, Adam?
Nope, it's all good. So like Alika said, once we begin the screen share, there'll be an option at the top that says View Options, and you can just click that, and it'll offer you a few things that you can choose from. I recommend the side-by-side mode. It allows you to see both Alika and both Gordon in decent proportions, as well as the artwork. But you can choose whatever works best for you, and you can, test out a few options as well. And if you have any questions, again, they'll be taking questions throughout the whole session, so you can put them in the chat, you can put them in the Q&A. You can hang on to them until the end. It's up to you.
Amazing. Okay, so let's get started here. So we have, 1 second. We have Anthony. Tell me about Anthony.
Yeah, it's a self-portrait. So this was, I was doing a lot of, when I started painting a lot of shoes. I started just looking for images that I liked, or taking pictures of my own or my partner's shoes. And that's kind of how I got started. Was if you found me at an art fair, I was the shoe guy. So I had these great portraits of shoes, and often it was, focusing on the shoes and the socks. You never really saw much more of the person other than their pant legs. And I really like that as sort of a neutral way of entering portraiture, because anyone could be represented by those shoes. Anyone, it didn't have to be, it could be any gender, it could be any race, it could be any person. Which eventually I realized was a bit problematic, because we should be represented. But anyway, that was a portrait of my shoes that I took, that I ended up painting. As an aside, I'm very proud right now that painting was chosen by House of Anansi Press to be the cover of a reissue of a book of short stories by Austin Clarke, a renowned Beijing Canadian author. Yeah, so that's going to be coming out. It's called When He Was Free and Young and Used to Wear Silk. So that was a nice little message I found in my inbox that they would like that when they approached me about it. So that will be available in August for purchase. Yeah.
I think it's just so important that we're able to have pieces of artwork, even, for books and that sort of thing, that are also done by other Black Canadian artists. Like, I feel like, 20 years ago, that might have been more difficult to pull together or to see.
Well, to be quite honest, I get quite frustrated when I see something significant with regards to representation and it wasn't done by an artist of color. I feel like it's lost opportunities for people who are otherwise marginalized and overlooked to actually be able to have their work shown, and they have a genuine connection to the community. So I think that is incredibly important.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing that in August. So after that, we have Midway.
Yes.
The inclusion now of the sky.
Yes. So the sky thing started off as a bit of a way of challenging myself, because I had a friend who painted beautiful skies, and I said I could never paint clouds. And he said, "Why don't you try?" So I ended up doing this painting and then I ended up becoming a big fan of clouds and skies. And I really love the feeling of ambiguity in this painting of, you don't really know where this person is. Is he going up? Is he going down? Which is why I call it midway. But, so yeah.
In an alternate space, we're not sure.
Exactly.
We see that continue as a theme in Galvanize.
Yes. Galvanize was one that I did later, and something I've spoken about before was, just like in portraiture, you realize that people bring different perspectives to what they're looking at, and this was particularly interesting to me because I was at a Toronto Outdoor Art Fair, or now Toronto Outdoor Art Exhibition, and I was showing this painting with a few other shoe paintings along with some portraits of Black men. And I had a gentleman think that the shoes I thought these were hopeful and happy. He was viewing them as hangings. He was viewing them as people who are being lynched. And I was quite surprised. It was an interesting point of view. And then I actually started to realize that I'm seeing someone just mention that these say hope to them. And that's exactly, I'm glad to hear that, because to me, I've always tried to create paintings that try to bring some sort of element of hope or happiness to them.
Yeah.
No matter what
you can imagine them like walking through the clouds, but yeah,
exactly.
It's always an interesting process to understand how people read work and where the references come from, and then we'll explore that more as we go through your work. So the next one we have Feather in My Cap. So this was this was from 2017. So you'd moved away from painting yourself and started to explore other subject matter. How did you arrive at this dashing young man in this suit?
Well, so it's a bit of a mishmash of images, but when I first started painting, and I eventually made a few artist friends, and one connected me with this artist that I follow. He's a fashion illustrator in the US, and he said, you've got to start publishing your work on Instagram. So I started doing my stuff on Instagram, and I realized that Instagram was an incredible source of models, people who love to have their pictures painted. So so this was a model that I found, and I really liked the image, and I asked him if I could paint it, and he said sure. And at this point, I had started exploring the idea of doing historic dandies. I really like the idea of revisiting times where Black people were underrepresented, or if we were represented, it was usually in some form of property in the background, to sort of insert ourselves and reimagine history of North America and European history, including Black people who were part of the social fabric, but were often overlooked and never, deemed important enough for a portrait. So this is a contemporary Black man, obviously with the dreadlocks, and he's wearing the clothing, but with the feel of painting that might have come up from the 18th century. So this is 1700s clothing. And I also started sourcing at that time antique and vintage frames to frame my work. And so the work became, the frames became a way of accenting my work to give it sort of this additional depth of history and historic feel to it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so I started finding people via Instagram to start painting.
I mean, there's a wealth of faces there, so
oh yeah,
a lot of subject matter to work with.
Well, I think that's one of the things that's so nice about social media is that I started to get so connected to so many different kinds of people, not just in the US, but around the world. And it became this great creative exchange where we understood we had something in common, some mutual bond that connected us, and we could create together.
It's amazing.
Thanks.
Let's take a look at Patience, who I really feel like there's a lot of presence to him in the air of his, smoking, the positioning. Yet there's something there's an emotion in his eyes. I find it a bit almost like worry or anticipation.
Well, thanks. I think, well, this is actually an actor. I don't paint very many people of note, but this is Ashton Saunders from Moonlight. And it was a photo that a photographer that I follow had taken of his face and his positioning, but I put this brocade robe on him. And the sense of, at the time too, I had just come back from a trip from New York, and we'd been in some historic buildings, and I really like the sense of age. And so I really want to sort of capture that feeling of a different era. And I think when you said about the emotions you see in his eyes, I think that's really interesting, because often I really just people ask me, how do I paint the way I paint? But what I try to do is I try to convey a feeling. And so there was a feeling of strength to me in this, a melancholy. So this idea, I called it Patience for a couple of reasons. One, because it looks like he's either just being patient or he's being patient about something that he's waiting, or just completed something that he was waiting for. But I also like the idea that this was such an intricate painting and such a challenging painting that I needed the patience to paint it, that I had to allow myself that gift of time to do the detail and do the work that I wanted to do. And this painting is, I still get comments on this, and it still pops up now and then in different publications. And it was recently on Cityline, a TV show here, where they are featuring it as a way of adding portraiture into your home. So the collector who bought it was kind enough to lend it to them for that show.
Oh, amazing.
Thanks.
And so we've seen now two portraits. Obviously, your work focuses on Black men.
Yes.
How did you sort of, I guess, make that choice initially?
I think because of the people that I met and when I spoke to, and also because of how I was raised with regards to, both my parents were very, I think all Black parents are very open with their children about the reality of where we live as diasporic peoples and what that means. And so realizing there was this vacuum, that there was this space where Black men weren't really being represented, thinking back to as a child, that my father would always point out to me that most portrayals of people in media or on TV, pop culture, was negative. They were drug dealers, or they were poor and they were struggling. Very rarely did you just see them just being people. It was always their race always, I know being Black obviously is part of who we are, but I mean, it was, they were always so downtrodden. It was always so negative, or it always fell into these stereotypes.
They're
So
really driving the narrative.
yeah, exactly. So having that always in my mind, I realized that, you know, this is important to start doing positive representation of Black men. And that's what drove me to do this. I also think it's important to point out too that I am a full-time teacher. And so I know that portraiture is a hard thing to sell. Black portraits of Black men aren't easy to sell. So I know that I am privileged in the sense that I had a way of making money, of earning a living as I developed my body of work. That I had the freedom to explore these things because I was also generating income. I wasn't totally dependent on my work, which is kind of, it's a little depressing in the sense that they're very challenging. It's not an easy thing to sell in the market, in the Canadian market specifically.
Right.
In the American market, obviously, they sell a lot faster. But in Canada, that sort of openness to exploring different avenues and different ways of seeing art is very challenging.
And I think you make such an important point about, I feel like, why your work is also so critical. Because if it's difficult for artists to take up the subject matter of themselves, you know, as Black men, then, you know, it becomes more difficult for that work to be produced regularly, for it to enter into galleries, for it to enter into, you know, our larger institutions. And so at what point then do Black people enter into the public gaze in this way, right? In this way that we understand the role of portraiture.
Exactly.
And so it's so amazing that you have taken up Black men in particular, and that way that there's this greater chance that other people are able to see the beauty, right? The humanness, the diversity of perspective and experience in a fine art setting.
Thank you. I agree.
And so next we have Sinu. And so this is a more recent work from 2019.
Yes.
I think what struck me about it was also the difference in clothing that was chosen for this. So, you know, I think in you know, the earlier pieces we're seeing, you know, 1700, we're seeing suits, we're thinking about luxury, we're thinking of brocade and fabric. And now here we have a red hoodie, which, you know, I think more recently the hoodie has become this, you know, symbol associated with the plight of Black men, given the shooting of Trayvon Martin a few years ago by, you know, his neighbor dressed in a hoodie, 17 years old, walking through his neighborhood. Was that a deliberate choice for you here?
Yeah, I as an artist, you know, I think I'm a bit ADHD. I get a concept and I just kind of want to run in 5 different directions. And it drives my partner crazy because he feels like I'm not really completing one thing. Yeah, so I ended up doing this whole point. There was a whole point around 2018, 2019 where I was having conversations with people with you know, largely with white people. And I was really thinking that they were really seeing things in my work that I thought were really negative, that they were bringing their baggage to my painting. So with regards to seeing a Black man, like in Feather in My Cap, for example, I was told by an art consultant that would never sell because he was gazing directly at the viewer. And so I kind of get this information all the time that that even though I think I'm painting stoic, calm Black men, people will say, oh, he looks this, he looks angry, or he looks aggressive, or there was always some sort of negative word. And I realized that it's absolutely insulting, obviously, in this day and age, that you can't just paint a calm Black person without someone projecting something about anger in it.
Right.
And so I started exploring the whole idea of actual anger. And I kind of said, screw this, if people are going to see anger, we have a lot to be angry about. As Black people, we go through our lives biting our tongues when we're in situations where we want to scream and we want to yell, but for our own self-preservation, we have to weigh the consequences of every move we make. It's really interesting right now with everyone getting ticketed and fined for violating COVID rules and quarantine rules, and we're kind of like, some of us are used to having to look over our shoulder at the time to see who's watching us, and all the people aren't used to that. But anyway, so I did a series of paintings where I showed a lot of people showing anger. It was called visceral. It was about showing those emotions that we can't always show, that we swallow, but showing them on our faces. So I showed people yelling, I showed people angry, I showed people talking. And in that show, I also developed the line of work of the hoodies, where I had the visible, which was the face and the expression, and then I had the hidden, which was the hoodies where I had the faces covered. And I wanted to use the people in the hoodies as a way of conveying an emotion without necessarily seeing their face. It would be told by their body language perhaps. And in that body of work, I started exploring using black a lot, because when you start learning things about art theory, concepts about art theory, you're learning it from a Western perspective and what black would mean and what dark colors are supposed to mean. But I wanted to start using black and dark colors in a way that I thought made my subject shine and didn't necessarily have to convey something negative all the time. So I use a lot of black now in a lot of my work to sort of reclaim the word black and reclaim the word dark and not have to have it mean something negative.
Right.
But the idea of the hoodie to me was that it is universal, and it is something for a lot of people. It can make you feel invisible, like this idea of this one in camouflage being called unseen. The idea is that he's in camouflage, he should be blending in, but as Black people, we know that we often stand out at times when we might not want to be noticed, that we are being watched.
And I love
Does that make sense, or does that,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I love the positioning of this person, because it's just that hunched over, hands in pockets, cozy like vibe that you see, and I think that what's beautiful about your paintings too is the ability to convey that sense of the familiar, that you can locate, yourselves, your brother, your uncle, anyone in this particular painting in a way, just because of that positioning, because that's how people wear hoodies.
Yeah.
So it's a familiar way that someone's body curves.
Yeah, I think when you watch people in a hoodie, it can mean many things. I talked to a guy who's a boxer and said for him putting on his hooded robe makes him feel stronger. It feels like it's an armor. Where some people put on their hoodie because they want to just put on their headphones and their hoodie and just disappear. So it has so many different layers to it.
Right. Okay, let's take a look and talk a bit about hair. Okay. And the role that hair plays in your paintings. So here we have crosshairs, literally, and dreadlocks we see as a theme across some of your portraits as well. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. Sure. I think it's really important to include things that we don't see often in fine art. And you don't see a lot of paintings of people with dreadlocks, in galleries. You just don't. And to be quite honest, I really enjoy painting dreadlocks. I've told people that I find it kind of relaxing, because you're building up a lot of layers and you have to develop a certain sense of patience, and you end up using a lot of colors that you didn't think. Pardon me?
I was going to ask you about your technique. Like, how do you actually get that texture?
It becomes quite impressionistic. It just becomes about applying a lot of paint, but it's also about developing layers. So understanding where your lights and darks will be, understanding the difference between light as it's being illuminated on a subject versus how hair is lighter on the ends. So trying to capture both those elements. That's what's kind of key, is understanding that there has to be a light source, but no one has jet black, or it's rare to see jet black hair, especially with dreadlocks. As they get sun bleached and sunlightened, they go red, they go brown, they go blonde. So it's trying to understand those layers and trying to capture the right amount of light and the right amount of hair color. I don't know if that makes sense. So there's actually a lot of orange, there's a lot of yellow, There's a lot of blue. There's a lot of, and it's all trial and error. It's just a lot of experimentation.
Yeah, I think you do it really, really well. And I find it, yeah, such a, I don't know if radical is the word, but a choice, just because of how dreadlocks are perceived both within and outside of the Black community. You know, I'm Jamaican, and I'm always remark when I go home at how people actually shun people of Rastafarian religious practice. It's dreadlock
Right.
seen as messy, and they've just internalized a lot of the Western views of them. And
Right.
so while I think dreadlocks are more popular and accepted now in Canada and the US, we know that historically, both in, you know, the Caribbean community and in you know, North America, there's been this rebuke, this resistance to understanding how dreadlocks and people being able to just wear them. So
And they're beautiful, you know, and that's the worst part, is that they're so beautiful, and they accentuate so many positive features. I,
mhm.
I was a waiter when I was a young man, and I had dreadlocks back when I still had hair, and there were these guys that didn't want me to serve them because they said I was unwashed because
Yeah,
I had dreadlocks.
yeah.
So it's there. I still hear it.
Persist. And that's why, you know, this is just such an important to see, you know,
Yeah,
blocks here. No, sorry, this photo's a little blurry, but such a massive piece, Paramount.
yeah.
Uh, and the way that, yeah, the locks here are just wound up is just beautiful. And I love how the flow of like the snake also, like, there's this the relationship to this whole piece that feels like it's kind of moving.
Well, it's interesting because I actually just saw someone post on Instagram about, you know, there's politics everywhere, but inherently when you represent Black people, there's always going to be a political aspect. And so the more I painted and the more I got into it and the more I understood, I started to feel a little overwhelmed, and I really just wanted to start painting allegorically. I just wanted to start painting things that were just sort of light and fun. Not necessarily fun, thank you, but um, I wanted to do something that was just pure creative expressions.
Mm.
And so I took inspiration from the Yoruba for this one, the Yoruba religion and the Orishas. And this is actually a Toronto artist named Oluche,
Mhm.
and he does a lot of work, and his work is beautiful. And he did a whole series on the Yoruba Orisha, and I never say everything right. So this is the rainbow deity, Oshumare. I used Oluche to represent the rainbow deity,
Yeah.
Oshumare, who is like the deity of cycles, um, and this he could be represented as the snake or as a rainbow. So I started exploring adding more color,
Mm.
and I wanted it to be kind of part of a story. I wanted this to be sort of like this concept of him in a different dimension, and the mortals were presenting him with flowers, you know, as a gift, and the snake being the other way that he could be represented. So this was a really, I won't say eye-opening. It was a very opening painting for me. It allowed me to just sort of start expressing creatively just what comes purely from what's inside.
Right.
Not that my other paintings aren't, but I didn't want this to have a subtext surrounding political views.
Mm.
I can't really articulate in the way I want it. I just wanted to do something that was just pure expression, and this is what came out.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Now let's talk a bit about framing, because I think you mentioned earlier that you've chosen frames previously to really add to this sort of storytelling of the portraits that you're taking. Um,
Yes.
I've, you know, seeing your work in person. The frames are intricate. They're heavy.
They're
They're
really heavy.
yeah, like they're really quite special. Where do you source your frames?
um, they're really hard to find. So I go to a lot of antique shops. Uh, I used to try to go to junk dealers, but you start to realize that ones that look really good, you start to realize, oh wait, this was made from the 80s. Like there's something different. It's not. It doesn't have the same sort of. The newer ones just don't work. So there are some that are made in the 60s that will still work, but I prefer the real genuine antiques when I can get them. So this one, this frame in particular, I think what I do source them. I go to a lot of antique fairs, but a lot of the antique dealers now know me and they know what I'm looking for. So now that I've established a relationship with them for a few years, they'll actually send me photos, send me emails, letting me know when they have something that they think I might be interested in. And so that's taken a little bit of the pressure off of me to go around hunting all the time. But also when we go on road trips, as I said, I'm a teacher, so when we're in the summer, if we go on a road trip, we'll stop, I'll map out antique places to hit to see what I can find. And what's interesting is that I love the pieces that are damaged. I love how that becomes part of the story. And one of the reasons why I think I can find some of these pieces is because they are damaged and people don't want them. So I'm still trying to use the things that are being overlooked or discarded because they're not perfect, they're not pristine.
Right.
But I think it's part of our nature to always want to, you can't throw that out. I mean, not that they were throwing out, but you know what I mean? Like they're not as desirable to other people.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an interesting part of like the storytelling as well. It suggests that it's from this older time. And so you're in a way like reinserting us back into a history that we were a part of to begin with, or weren't acknowledged to be a part of.
Exactly.
I
love painting this guy's hair.
It's so well done.
It was challenging, but it was amazing. As I said, it's kind of become very therapeutic. It just becomes you get pulled in.
Yeah, he definitely. I think it's the contrast too between his hair and his clothing is so great because he just feels familiar. Like I feel like I know him.
Yeah.
Even though he's in all of his regalia. Okay.
Yes.
Let's make sure we're getting on with time. This is another beautiful portrait as well as really beautiful frame.
Thank you. And this is a local writer, David, as well. So I think that frame too was actually, I was contacted by an antique place that I had bought one earlier from, and they said, we got this other one. It was like right away. I was like, yeah, it's mine. So it's hard to pass them up.
Yeah, gorgeous. And then, wait, we got this wrong? Oh, we're in the right place. Yes. I know. Paramount, Provision, Steadfast. Audacity. I was saying the choice of pearls here.
Yeah.
What did you think?
This was an interestingly sourced photo. A friend of mine was at I don't know which celebration it was in New York City, but it was like an Afro Fest, and he has this wonderful. My friend Douglas has this wonderful way of saying, "I'm going to take your picture," and it ends up becoming a video.
Oh,
so you don't know.
Yeah, we know Doug and his photo to video.
Yes, exactly. So he did a video of this young man that he met because he loved his look and said, "Can I take a photo?" And the guy was just sort of posing for him. This is what he was wearing, and I love this because I love the idea of it exploring masculinity. He was totally owning this look, and you couldn't question it. It just worked on him. But I love this idea of the pearls and that he just embodied who he was. And if you see the video, he's just moving so freely and just so beautifully. And also this painting was a response painting to an image that I'd seen where it was on, I can't remember the name of the gallery, but it was in the US, and they posted a historic painting of a Black man in red. And the description underneath it described him as being defiant. His eyes were defiant. And again, it was another one of those situations where someone was just looking at the viewer. And so I call this audacity because it's like the idea of having nerve. Like, how dare this man dare to look me in the eye? How dare he has the audacity to be wearing pearls and feeling comfortable. So I really like this idea of this confrontation of having people start questioning what biases they're bringing to looking at images of Black men.
And I see that as a theme, like a consistency in your work. Like the subjects are often looking at feels directly at you.
Yeah, I think that's what conveys the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I think when someone looks at you, and even if they're looking away, it's still a way of conveying emotion. But I think we're so used to the casual glance away. And I enjoy figuring out a way of having that connection being made between the sitter, the person in the portrait, and the viewer.
And it definitely, I feel like that connection comes through very strongly in this piece.
Thanks.
So we're gonna stop, just pause here for a second, because I believe the next set of work gets into your most recent exhibit, some of the selected works in your most recent exhibit at United Contemporary Gallery. So I'm excited to share some of those. We don't often see Black artists in private galleries. Can you tell us a bit about how that came together?
Oh, okay. Sure. The gallery owner is a wonderful man named Burke Patterson, who approached me about 2 years ago about his gallery and would I be interested in connecting with him. And I was still fairly new to the whole scene. It's interesting because I don't know how frank to be, but I think I know I'm with the right person right now in the right gallery, and I'm glad that things have worked out the way they did. But I was always surprised that I could have a piece in the ROM and get that press and never be approached by a commercial gallery, except for Burke. So there's this, you really start to think about what publicity really means. So if you get pushed to a certain degree of visibility, that doesn't necessarily guarantee a certain response from within the artistic community.
Right.
So Burke and I, we sort of waited around, and he reapproached me a year and a half later, and it just felt really right. Our conversation really rang true, and we decided to work together. So this was my first show at the gallery. I was part of a group show of his, and also when he showed at Art Toronto, which is the big convention that happens in the fall. But this was my first show that opened up with him in March. And I was really looking forward to doing a show that was kind of like what I talked about with Paramount. I really had ideas in my head that I really wanted to stage and get out, but I needed the right space for it. And Burke was an incredible person to bounce ideas off of, and to really, I always had the support of my partner, which was great, but it was also good to get the support of someone else to sort of help me follow through on my ideas.
Right. Yeah, totally. And this was this your first solo exhibition?
No, I've had solo shows before. This is my first solo with him. This is my first, yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so let's get into a bit of that. I know there's some questions too about sales and typically where you sell work.
Right.
How does you can tell us, how does someone typically purchase your work?
So typically, it's amazing. I've actually sold paintings through Instagram, which is great. But usually they contact me and I tell them the price of the work. But generally, as an artist, most of my sales have happened through art fairs. So things like the Toronto Artist Project. I used to do the Riverdale Art Walk. So those fairs are really good to connect with people, but also to sell work. And then I do some shows. I did some shows at Band, Black Artist Network, and Dialogue. But people generally can just contact me. The work that I have with United Contemporary that I'm selling through the gallery as well. So that's been a really nice feeling to be able to also have a representative to work with the sales as well.
And for folks to be able to go in and sort of see your work.
Yeah. So they can contact United Contemporary directly for things that they see as well.
Okay. I'm just going to go on to our next piece. So this is Yield.
Yeah.
And this was part of your show.
Yes.
Net Worth.
Yes. So the show.
Yeah, go ahead.
The show was called Net Worth, and it was an exploration of Black masculinity in the sense of looking at what that really means today. But this show ended up being really personal for me because it actually really explored a lot of themes and feelings that I had inside of me. So it was about meeting the expectations, or people having expectations, placing expectations upon you because I'm a Black man.
Right.
expecting me to be able to have a certain level of strength or skill or coordination. Oh, you must play basketball. You're 6'4" and you're black. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so I did end up playing basketball, but it was mostly because of the pressure. I had no interest in it at all. But in
Right.
high school, I sort of felt pressured into playing it. So this show is exploring that idea of I don't want to keep reusing the word stereotype, but it is about addressing those stereotypes and how that ends up exerting pressure on people, and also where those stereotypes originated and how that connects to athleticism.
And definitely athleticism, you can see that throughout the pieces. I see here there's a symbolism of Michael Jordan and the
Yeah,
Jordan brand, and that being synonymous with that athletic excellence and blackness
right.
and the height of that there. And so you've inscribed that on the clothing as well.
Yeah, so I really love doing these camo pieces, and that was born of the idea that when I was doing my other paintings of camo, I started seeing figures in the black parts of the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
I started seeing them as people, and I was like, oh my God, they're people. So I really wanted to explore this idea of including figures embedded in the camo. And
Mm-hmm.
this to me is also the idea of how, you know, you are blending in, you are meeting the expectations when you end up, you know, participating in certain things. I don't want to dismiss that athletics and sports aren't important.
Right.
I'm just talking about the fact that for me personally, it wasn't who I was, but it was what people were projecting on me,
Right.
and for other people as well.
Which can also feel very like constraining, right? When you
Yeah,
have different interests and paths and basketball isn't your priority, and yet people keep saying, so do you play? Do you play? You know, and
yeah,
that being sort of seen as the only thing that you can do.
yeah. I think it's important though to recognize that sports like basketball has allowed a lot of people to elevate themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I also think we need to look at the idea of the relationships between athletes and team owners, and you know the idea of trading bodies and all that sort of stuff, and the history of how that connects to our experiences as Black people in North America.
So I do have a question in the Q&A section, section of our chat. And so someone's wondering if you do fairs in the US as well.
Do I do fairs? No, not yet. I thought about it. This may have been my fault to try it, like 2020, but I think all the art fairs are on the back burner right now. I have sold directly to people in the US via Instagram, and I also did have my one of my paintings show at it's a complicated story, but at a furniture show in North Carolina, and I could have almost had a bidding war on it. It was incredible to have the reaction and to see the reaction of people who fell in love with my piece in the US. It was a totally different reaction than it was in Canada. It was like one painting and it just kind of blew up down there.
Wow.
And yeah, so it's a very different market.
Yes.
It's a very good.
I think, to be fair, African Americans have been together longer, if you will. And so
Yeah,
they, reflecting on their identity as African Americans for a much longer time. And so I think their ability to invest in pieces and art that reflects them and their families and histories is something that they've
yeah,
become more familiar and more normative for them than, say,
yeah,
Canadians who are coming from all over the world. You're from Trinidad. My parents are from, Guyana and Jamaica, and we're still sort of forging a sense of community here.
yeah. I think just like the art world, a lot of us end up working by ourselves, and that's what I love about the Nia Centre. That you're trying to say to people, stop doing everything by yourself. Let's get together.
Come
And
together.
because of that history in the U.S., I think there's that greater sense of people. They can access pieces like this too more
Yeah.
readily. See them, they can find them. There's more of them there.
Yes. And then we got hoop.
Yes.
Again.
So who it's hard to see in the smaller one, but on his spine there's a basketball player there.
Yeah.
So this was meant to be one of my centerpiece paintings of this show. It's a bigger piece, beautiful frame, and the player is more subtle, but he's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you can see I'm still exploring playing with black.
Yeah, which I love. But this piece really a lot more gold and green palette. There's a lot of light in this piece, which is
Yeah,
the title piece, net
yeah,
worth. of the
Yes.
exhibit?
So this one I want to explore a few things. The idea of that's a metal basketball net that he's wearing as a necklace. So it's the kind that you'll see in a park. But I wanted to treat it like a piece of jewelry. I also wanted it to be reminiscent of neck pieces that you might see worn by certain tribes in Africa. So I really like this idea of sort of tying together this whole piece of the significance of the basketball chain to our, to a large segment of our culture. And also it's this idea of it being blingy, like this idea of it being this elevated piece, but it's simply just a galvanized steel basketball net.
I also love the fact that the chains are broken in that sense, because it does suggest sort of like a post slavery context. I think we
Yeah, it's interesting, and that's one of the things I love about this piece, if I can say that about my own piece, is that it's a black man in chains, but it has light, and and it doesn't feel oppressive to me. It doesn't feel negative. It doesn't meet that confining element of what those two things combined could be.
There's still pride there.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Hair. We're naming hair, natural hair, as a key theme here in this piece. And I think I recognize that face as well.
That's Ishmael Waterman, a local Toronto artist, a photographer, amazing guy. I've painted him.
Great head hair. Yeah.
Yeah, I painted him many, many times. And so this was part of it. This is called Smoke or Chew. And the logo across it is saying natural hair. And it's in response to, so in this show, I not only looked at the idea of sports and stereotypes, I also looked at Black ephemera, which would be what they used to call, or some people call, African American memorabilia, where we used, or not where we use, where whites use Black people as mascots to promote the strength of their products, or in some ways to also to keep us down, to push us down, to make us less than human. So I wanted to explore looking at those items and reframing them in a way where I'm taking control of these messages. So this was a can of tobacco from the 1900s. Some people can see the name of it. I don't know if I can say it on Zoom but it's the N-word, hair, tobacco. And so I switched it to natural hair. And this is where you see this rendering, this drawing of an African person in a very stereotypical way. And they called it that because the tobacco leaves themselves were tight and dark and curly. And so they eventually, in the 1950s, this product continued to be made in the 1900s. And eventually in the 1950s, they renamed it to bigger hair in order to meet.
Long until the 50s.
Yeah, it's crazy. If you Google it, you'll find there's like a whole wiki page on all this stuff. So when I first found this tin, I was just blown away that this even existed. I know a lot of it existed, but this one was one of the most ridiculous things I'd seen.
Right. And where did you find this?
At an art fair, at an antiques fair. There's a fair called the Christie Antique Fair. It happens out in the Dundas area. And it's amazing when I find a Black ephemera, because I'm usually the only Black person at an antique fair. So I usually say to them, who are you going to sell it to? I'm the only person you're going to sell it to. So I try to barter with them just based on the fact that they have something that's so offensive to so many people.
Right.
But I
keep you buy this and put it in where? And put it where?
Yeah, exactly. So I have a collection of these pieces that I look at all the time and look for inspiration.
Nice. And I think that there was a similar piece that inspired Vim and Vigor.
Yes, so this is Vim and Vigor. It might be an old-fashioned term, but it's the idea of when you're cleaning something very intensely or it's very strong. So this is called, and in the background you see it's called Negro Power. Negro Power is what you can see in the back. Right. And the person in this picture is a composite, and he's actually based on one of the faces that I used to develop this face was an antique photo that I found online of a slave. And in the picture, he's actually shirtless, and it's a documentation of all the whip marks on his back. So it's this old painting from the 1900s, I believe, or maybe 1800s, and it's his scarred back in black and white. And so I wanted to take that and again recontextualize it in a way that isn't so harsh, isn't so negative, and to humanize someone who is so treated so inhumanely.
And literally then rewrite sort of his existence in a way, at least.
Yeah.
In the archive.
And trying to give dignity back to people who should have always had that dignity. And that's based on this Negro powder, which was a cleaning powder that was manufactured in Montreal, Canada. So this is one of the things that I think people need to understand, is that this isn't just the US. I've seen things from Germany, that are putting down Black people. You see things from Asia, from China. And this is a product that was manufactured in Montreal. And I couldn't find very much in the provenance and the history of this company, but this is one of the things that I have in my collection.
And it's so important, as you say, because we really, as Canadians, just erase our connection to the slave trade and to slavery and the subsequent systems that still embrace racism. But there are these, small markers and stories that creep forward. And so this is, I guess, another element of that.
Yeah, I mean, Montreal has a huge history of minstrel performances and things like that. So, I mean, a lot of things that people just choose to ignore. Even acknowledging that this kind of advertising existed, there's a lot of people that don't know about Sambo art and all these horrible depictions of Black people that existed in North America for hundreds of years.
So from paintings now, my greatest surprise at this exhibit, and I just sort of gave a preview of it, was your shift to sculpture.
Yes.
Nothing but net. I thought this piece was stunning for a number of reasons. One was just the physical significance of it, like the breadth of the piece, just taking up a lot of space in the gallery and just feeling drawn to it. And both the way that it's framed. So again, this, to me, like the act of framing things suggests their significance and their importance in art. And so again, this looking at sports and the way that it's been elevated in our society and our community, the framing adds to that. But then the texture and the textile, the cloth that was used, I know you're really intentional about that as well. Can you talk to us a bit about the textiles, which goes back to your background in design? Tell me about that.
So I love this idea of working with vintage textiles. So these are all seed bags, and the top one is actually a fruit picker's sack. So it actually they're antique farm textiles, essentially. So the top one is a fruit picker's sack. There's actually still a leather rim around it, and I actually used a strap to attach it to the basketball hoop. And then the rest of it the body of it is all seed farm sacks. So it would have been stuff that seed would have been delivered in. And I wanted to connect this idea of athleticism and labor together. And also my feelings about how and where did this stereotype of the strength of Black people, the ability to persevere, where did this come from? Right. And to me, thinking about it, it would have come historically from the idea of slaves. The fact that people could be so maltreated, but then still expected to go out and work, which still ties into how we're viewed today, that we have a higher tolerance of pain, that people can't get medications when they go to the emergency room because they people are faking it, either to get drugs or because that there have been studies that have shown that some doctors feel that Black people have a naturally higher tolerance of pain. Yeah. So I wanted to point out a couple of things with this. So connecting the physicality of athleticism to the labor, the types of work that so many Black people have had to do in North America for hundreds of years, but also the fact that this is an impossible task. When I call it nothing but net, meaning that this net just keeps going on and on and on and on. That's over 20 feet long or something, that piece of fabric. Right. And it is a bag, it's an actual sack. So to me, it's, again, I know that sports are a way out, they're a way of elevating ourselves, and it's important for our general health and well-being. But I also wanted to discuss this idea that it's an aspiration that can be very challenging to reach, and that to actually get to the point where it actually takes you to the places where you want to go.
Beautiful. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing so much of this insight. I know there's been some comments in the chat that people are really enjoying being able to get more detail on the inspiration and intention behind your work. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. I do have two questions that are coming from the chat. So one is around commissions, which I feel like I should know, but I don't actually know whether or not you do commission pieces as part of your practice.
I do commission pieces as part of my practice. I think it's really important. The hard part about commissions is timelines, trying to meet people's timelines and being realistic with that.
Mm-hmm.
And also understanding how much control I have over a commission. I've heard some horror stories from some artists. So, but yes, I do commissions as well. Yes.
Nice. And so people typically reach out to you on social media or on your website?
Yeah, or just send me an email, yes.
Nice. And I have another question here for emerging painters who might be joining us or when we share this piece. Is there any wisdom that you would share with them based on your experience so far in the arts world?
I love talking, but I think one of the most important things is to have honest people in your life. Mm-hmm. So people who are going to give you true feedback. I think there's that. I think when you do start showing your work, I think it's important to not just know how to talk about your work, but ask people what they see in your work, because I said that informs you. I think it's also important to remember to finish your work, that to hold yourself to a high standard as you possibly can. And I know that's easier said than done. But I think the best thing to do is, if you can, go out, start going to galleries, start going to art fairs. And I think it's important for galleries and art fairs, whether we're buying or not, for us to take space in those places. We need to be seen more in those places. Mm-hmm. There needs to be an understanding that we are part of this community. And so I think it's important for people to get out. But I do think mostly it's important to also be very intentional with your painting. And the last thing I'd have to say is also learn to celebrate the small things. One of the things that people always tell me to do, and I said I painted one actor and I painted a few other famous people, but I'm constantly being told by people, oh, you should paint the Raptors, or you should paint this rapper. And there are all these people in the Black community that are Black communities who have already been celebrated and elevated to a point of almost being like deities. And I think we need to celebrate ourselves. Like, we need to start representing ourselves more and being the average people that we are. There's beauty in all of us, and that needs to be celebrated, and that needs to be put forward, not just the people who we already know.
Yes! Sorry, if we were live, that would have come off a little easier, but but it's such an important point. I think it's one that I see resonate throughout your work, is this desire to show us in, the familiar, in ways that are quotidian, that are, just Black people being us, as we are, our hair, our clothing, and doing both, elevating us, but also just showing us as we are. And I think that you're right, that's so important, because it literally puts us into, the archive or the collective consciousness in a way that is humanizing, right? It's
if you look at a lot of the portrait art that you see there outside here, there is a real privilege of white people just being able to paint themselves in melancholy ways, and everyone just being drawn to it.
Right.
And that's a privilege that we haven't been afforded, to just paint ourselves as we are. Mm-hmm. And I think it needs to be encouraged and embraced.
Absolutely. So we have a couple more questions that are coming through the Q&A. One is asking how you choose your models. Is there anything particular that you look for in the men that that you end up drawing or painting?
Right. Well, I do some women as well. There's a woman behind me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a few things. One of the things I think has been interesting is the more I do this, the more beauty I see everywhere. Like, I'm actually sometimes overwhelmed by the beauty. I do find people that I know or people that I've gotten to know. Ishmael, I found a photograph of him that a photographer posted. I asked them if I could paint it, and then he and I have developed a relationship. And now he's offended when I don't paint him. So I'd waited too long. So some people I just meet either via social media or I meet them through my circles. I have had a couple of people, and I'm saying this, and I hope this doesn't happen too much. I have had a couple of people just send me photos on Instagram, and I'm like, "That's a great photo. Can I paint it?" So
like just
yeah.
Oh wow.
So that's happened as well.
That's
So I'm just open. I've done a couple of just kind of subtle pictures when no one's looking occasionally. I shouldn't say that, but yeah, I'm looking constantly, and I actually do use Instagram a lot as inspiration, not just to meet people, but because, as I said, there's so much beauty out there. There's so much creativity out there, and it really pushes me to keep producing work. So that's a bit vague, but it's kind of hard to explain exactly how I choose it. It's just, I know when
There's
I
a
see
lot of different input.
Yeah, it's about a feeling.
Speaking of motivation, are there any, like, are you motivated at all by TV or movies or music? Does that inform your work at all or keep you inspired at all?
It's a really good question. I'm smiling because anyone who knows me really well knows that if I'm painting in my studio here at home, I usually have it on Teen Titans Go. I'm watching cartoons.
Cartoons!
Watch cartoons while I paint, or weird thriller horror movies. So
really, Gordon, horror?
Yeah, I for some reason contemporary thriller horror movies have become the new art film to me because they're really no one really cares about them. So I feel like the storytellers are getting a little bit more creative. But it's hard to say. Like sometimes it's just really just an extension of feelings that I've had or concepts that I want to explore. My partner is a really great person to bounce ideas off of too. Sometimes he comes to me with ideas and say, "Have you thought about this?" But as far as music or pop culture or movies, they haven't really come into play with my inspiration. But I know how that works for other people. There's one artist that I know in Buffalo who his whole work is about music.
Mm. And for you, it's really just something that keeps you company.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a question that's a bit COVID related coming through. So the question is, during this sort of uncertain time, how have you been managing creatively? Has this affected your creative practice at all?
Totally. Totally. It's a very good question, and I'm going to answer honestly. I have had a really hard time feeling motivated to work for a couple of reasons. I'm a teacher as well, so now I've had to wrap my head around how I teach 7-year-olds with distance learning.
Right.
And the other thing is, I think, I'm seeing a lot of people writing about we need to give ourselves a break. Like this isn't normal, what we're experiencing. And putting pressure on ourselves sometimes to keep going isn't necessarily going to be the best thing. I've done 3 paintings, which is not a lot for me in the last month. I usually am way more productive. And one of the reasons why I've abandoned 2 paintings, and one I just wasn't happy with creatively, and one ended up becoming really negative. I was telling you about it a little bit. It's I wanted to actually address the ideas of minstrel shows in Montreal as a way of reclaiming them in a positive way. But at this point in time, I couldn't figure out how do I represent us being reduced to such ridiculous caricatures as people, where with white men and blackface. How do I find a way of, and do I even want to take any sort of ownership of that?
Right.
And so working on this piece, and it was just becoming more and more and more muddy and negative, and I just had to let it go.
Right.
And also, right now, it's interesting because I work from home and I paint on wood. It's hard to store a lot of my paintings, so a lot of my work, and I actually have a sculpture idea that I really want to work on right now. Right now, I really want to create my next sculpture that would be an extension of this show, but I know that I have nowhere to put it. right now. So my
Spaces.
heart,
Yeah.
my heart is working on, really wants to work on an installation piece, and painting doesn't seem to be filling that hole. I really want to do the installation piece, but I just can't get it started because I don't know where to put it when it's done.
These are all really important challenges, the challenge of space, challenge of, the medium that you're working in.
Yeah.
But what is keeping you, I guess, busy these past few weeks?
I've really been sort of focusing on self-care, really just sort of trying to manage my mindset. And I've done, as I said, the paintings I've been working on have been problematic. I just completed, and I say published when I post one on Instagram, of a young boy from, I think the early 1900s.
Yeah.
And it's kind of my COVID painting. But I think we're wrapping up. Oh, I was wrapping that part up. But yes, and that was a real challenging piece. So I don't know if it was because of the subject matter or because of what I was trying to execute. It was just very challenging for me to get through. So I gave myself patience to work through it. And I've been watching, the Tiger King, just like everybody else.
That is the show of choice, it would appear.
Yeah, it's pretty sad.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a unique topic. So last question, thinking about the point that you made earlier around just sort of balancing this shift to digital and distance learning, how do you generally balance being a full-time teacher and also working as an artist?
Generally speaking, so in regular time or in the time of the COVID, of Ms. Rona?
I'd say regular time. These are extenuating circumstances.
Right, yeah. So regularly, I pretty much would paint every evening and every weekend. Painting became a real release for me. It's something that I really enjoy doing. It's a great de-stressor for me. So it's just something, it's just part of my life. So I have to remember to take breaks. My partner is often encouraging me, like, you could just sit and watch TV. Like, I actually feel guilty in regular time, in days in the before time, when I would have paintings unfinished, I would have a hard time just sitting down watching TV in the evening. I would finish my dinner and go down to the studio and paint. So it's just part of my routine. It's just it's not work, in the sense that I love doing it so much, and I'm drawn to doing it so constantly.
Well, it's great that you can commit yourself in that way, and that it is a stress release for you, as opposed to the stress of feeling like you need to be doing it all the time, and what are you creating? Because I'm sure that leads to a lot more openness in how you approach your work.
Yes, definitely.
Amazing. Well, that does bring us to the end of our time. I know we're a bit over, so I wanted to thank you for so generously sharing so much detail about what inspires you, what informs your work, all of the research that you've done, as well as sharing some great tips as well for emerging artists who are also joining us on this chat. So thank you so much for being our first digital art talk. I want to thank everyone that joined us digitally as well, and dropped some comments in the chat or sent me a Q&A. It's been really great to learn more about your practice and everything that informs what you do. I'm a big fan of your work, so thank you so much.
I'm a big fan of you guys too, and this has been an amazing experience, and I'm so glad to have been your guinea pig for this. It's not scary. This has not been scary, and thank you to all the people who have been making comments and asking questions. It's the most challenging part for me is not hearing your voices and seeing your faces, but knowing that you are interacting has really made this a real pleasure. So thank you.
Yes, and more to come. Follow us along at Nia Centre on all social media platforms, as well as our newsletter. We will be for sure sharing some nuggets from this conversation with the rest of our community, so stay tuned.
Thanks.
Bye now. Bye, folks.
Bye.